in the quiet, isolated countryside of Germany. About 43 miles north of Munich stood a lonely farm known as Hinterkaifeck. The year was 1922, a time when rural life was hard and nights were painfully silent. The farm was surrounded by dense woods and endless fields, the perfect place to live in solitude or to hide something terrible. Hinterkaifeck was home to the Gruber family. Andreas Gruber, the stern patriarch, was known for his harsh temper. His wife, Cecilia, worked tirelessly to keep the household together. Their widowed daughter, Victoria, lived there too, along with her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia Jr. and 2-year-old Joseph. They also had a maid named Maria, who had just started working at the farm after the previous maid quit under strange circumstances. Life on Hinterkaifeck was quiet, maybe too quiet. In the days leading up to the tragedy, the family began noticing strange, unnerving signs that something or someone was watching them. One evening, Andreas discovered a trail of footprints leading from the nearby woods straight to their farm. The snow on the ground was fresh and untouched, which made the discovery even more disturbing. The prints went directly to the farmhouse, but there were no footprints leading away. Andreas searched the entire property, expecting to find a visitor or even a thief, but no one was there. The barn, the attic, every dark corner was empty. It was as if the visitor had simply vanished into thin air. Later that same night, the family began to hear strange noises coming from the attic. At first, they tried to dismiss it as rats or the old wood creaking, but the noises grew louder, more deliberate, like footsteps slowly pacing above their heads. Andreas climbed into the attic with a lantern, his heart pounding, but once again he found nothing. No sign of an intruder, just eerie silence. Over the next few days, more bizarre things began to happen. Andreas noticed that his keys were missing. Doors that were carefully locked at night were sometimes found wide open in the morning. Tools from the shed would be misplaced or vanish completely, only to reappear later in strange spots around the farm. The Grubers began to grow uneasy. The countryside was known for being safe, but there were whispers of soldiers returning from the war, desperate men roaming the land. Still, this felt different, calculated, personal, as if someone was deliberately trying to scare them. Victoria, the widowed daughter, was especially frightened. She begged her father to let them leave the farm for a few days, to stay in the nearby town until things calmed down. But Andreas refused. He was a proud, stubborn man who wouldn't be chased away from his land by ghost stories, as he called them. Meanwhile, the new maid, Maria, was growing more and more unsettled. She had only been at Hinterkaifeck for a few days, but already she regretted taking the job. The strange atmosphere in the house, the silent woods, the feeling of being watched. It was almost too much to bear. She confided to a friend in the village that something felt off about the farm, like a dark presence hung over it. What Maria didn't know was that the previous maid had quit for similar reasons. She had told neighbors she was terrified of the place, especially the attic, and that she often felt someone was watching her at night. No one took her warnings seriously. After all, it was just a quiet family farm. Right as the week went on, the unease turned into outright fear. One night, Victoria awoke to the sound of muffled voices outside her window. She crept to the glass and peered into the darkness, but saw nothing. The voices fell silent, leaving only the sound of the wind through the trees. The next day, Andreas confided in a neighbor about the strange happenings. He mentioned the footprints, the noises, the missing keys. The neighbor suggested contacting the police, but Andreas refused. He didn't want to be seen as paranoid or weak. Besides, he said, whoever was messing with them would eventually get bored and go away. But the very next evening, something happened that would make everyone at Hinterkaifeck realize just how wrong he was. As night fell, a heavy sense of dread settled over the farmhouse. The woods seemed darker than usual, the wind colder. Inside, the family gathered around the fire, trying to act normal, but their unease showed on their faces. Outside, unseen by them, someone or something was moving silently through the shadows, watching, waiting. The Grubers didn't know it yet, but this would be their last night alive. The next morning, the sun rose cold and pale over Hinterkaifeck Farm, but no smoke curled from the farmhouse chimney. No sound of animals being fed, no movement in the yard. The farm sat in eerie silence, as if the world itself was holding its breath. At first, the neighbors thought nothing of it. The Grubers were private people, and it wasn't unusual for them to keep to themselves. But as the day passed and still no one appeared, unease began to grow. By the second day, the neighbors were worried. The Gruber's animals were restless and unfed, mooing and braying loudly. The family's dog barked constantly, its cries carrying across the fields. This was not like the Grubers at all. Finally, on April 4th, several concerned neighbors decided to check on the family. Among them were Lorenz Schlittenbauer, a local farmer, and two of his companions. Lorenz had a complicated history with the Grubers. Some whispered that he and Victoria had once been romantically involved, and that he might even be the father of her youngest child, Joseph. But on this day, he claimed he only wanted to make sure everyone was safe. As the men approached the farm, a feeling of dread settled over them. The yard was unnervingly still. The barn doors stood slightly ajar, creaking in the breeze. The only sounds were the frantic cries of hungry animals. "Hello," Lorenz called out, his voice echoing. No answer. He called again. Still nothing. Cautiously, the men pushed open the barn doors and stepped inside. The smell hit them first, a thick, metallic stench that made their stomachs turn. Something was very, very wrong. As their eyes adjusted to the dim light, they saw a heap of straw in the corner, and beneath it, something else. Heart pounding, Lorenz kicked away the straw. What he uncovered froze him in place. There, lying in the dirt, was the body of Andreas Gruber. Beside him, the body of his wife, Chazalia. And next to them, Victoria and her young daughter, little Chazalia Jr. All four had been brutally murdered, their skulls smashed with a heavy, sharp weapon, likely a mattock, a type of farming tool. The sheer violence of the attack was almost unimaginable. Even more horrifying, it appeared the killer had lured each victim to the barn one by one, ambushing them in the darkness. For a moment, the men were frozen in shock. Then one of them stumbled back, whispering a prayer. "Where are the others?" Lorenz asked, his voice trembling. They searched the farmhouse, their fear mounting with every step. In the kitchen, they found the maid, Maria, lying dead in her bed, and in Victoria's room, they found little Joseph, just 2 years old, his tiny body lifeless. All 6 residents of Hinterkaifeck had been murdered. The horror of the discovery spread quickly through the village. By that evening, dozens of people had gathered outside the farm, whispering in fear. When police arrived from Munich, they were met with a scene unlike anything they had ever witnessed. The first thing they noticed was how strange the crime scene was. The barn, where the first 4 victims were found, showed no signs of forced entry. It seemed as if each person had walked into the darkness willingly, perhaps thinking they had heard a noise or seen something suspicious. How had the killer managed to lure them in, one after another, without raising the alarm? Even stranger, the farmhouse itself appeared almost normal. There were no signs of a struggle in the main rooms. In fact, meals were still set out on the table, as if the family had been interrupted during an ordinary evening. The beds were neatly made. The dog had been locked in the barn, but was unharmed. And then there was the most disturbing detail of all. Someone had been living in the house after the murders. The neighbors reported seeing smoke coming from the chimney in the days after the family's disappearance. Food had been eaten, the animals had been fed, and the farm maintained, as if the killer had made themselves at home in the house of the dead. The thought sent shivers down the investigators' spines. The murderer hadn't just killed the Grubers. They had stayed there, sleeping under the same roof as their victims. As police began their investigation, they quickly realized this was no ordinary crime. They searched for clues around the property. In the barn, they found blood spattered across the walls and floor. Footprints in the dirt matched what Andreas had seen days earlier. Prints leading into the farm, but none leading out. They also found the weapon. Mattock, caked with dried blood and hair, had been carefully hidden in the attic. Why would the killer leave it behind? Was it a message, a taunt? Even more unsettling was what they found, or rather, what they didn't find in the rest of the house. Money and valuables were left untouched. If this was a robbery, it was the strangest one imaginable. Nothing was taken, nothing disturbed, except the lives of 6 innocent people. The village was in chaos. Fear gripped the entire community. No one knew who they could trust. Neighbors began eyeing each other suspiciously, whispering theories in hushed tones. Some suspected Lorenz himself. After all, he had a connection to Victoria, and he had been the one to lead the search. But his alibi was solid, and there was no evidence against him. Others believed it was a stranger, a drifter or soldier passing through after the war. But why would such a person stay in the house for days afterward? Why care for the animals? Why leave valuables behind? As the investigation dragged on, the list of suspects grew. But so did the mystery. By now, the police were convinced this was not a random act of violence. Whoever had done this knew the family well. They had been watching the farm for days, maybe even weeks. They knew the routines, the layout, and how to manipulate the family's trust. The most chilling theory began to take shape. Some investigators believed the killer had been hiding in the house the entire time, possibly in the attic where the strange noises had been heard before the murders. The missing keys, the open doors, the voices in the night. It all began to fit together. Imagine it. For days, maybe weeks, someone had been living silently among the Grubers, slipping through the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And when that moment came, they struck without mercy. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck murders quickly became one of the most complex cases in German history. Detectives were faced with a nightmare. No clear motive, no surviving witnesses, and a crime scene that felt more like a ghost story than a murder. Despite their best efforts, the clues only seemed to raise more questions. The bizarre clues. There were details that still haunt investigators to this day. The footprints in the snow outside the farm. There was only one set of footprints leading in, but none leading out. This suggested that the killer had entered the property days before the murders and never left. The chimney's smoke. Multiple villagers reported seeing smoke rising from the chimney in the days following the killings. This means the murderer lived in the house for several days, feeding animals and eating meals while the bodies lay in the barn. The missing keys and strange noises. Andreas Gruber had told neighbors about missing house keys and unexplained noises in the attic shortly before the murders. The implication was terrifying. The killer may have been hiding in the house long before the attack, secretly observing the family. The animal care. The cows had been milked, the animals fed, and even the dog cared for. This wasn't a frenzied killer who fled the scene. It was someone comfortable, calm, and disturbingly methodical. The prime suspect, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. From the very beginning, suspicion fell on Lorenz Schlittenbauer, the neighbor who first discovered the bodies. Lorenz had a complicated relationship with the Gruber family. Rumors swirled that he had been romantically involved with Victoria. Some even believed he was the true father of her young son, Joseph. When the murders occurred, Victoria and her father, Andreas, were locked in a bitter dispute over her inheritance and Joseph's paternity. Tensions in the family were at an all-time high. Several villagers noticed Lorenz behaving oddly in the days following the discovery. He seemed to calm while viewing the bodies, almost detached. At one point, he unlocked doors at the farm with a key, suggesting he may have had one, despite Andreas claiming some keys were missing before the murders. During questioning, Lorenz contradicted himself multiple times, adding to suspicions, but there was no hard evidence linking him to the crime. His alibi was never fully disproven, and without modern forensics, police couldn't confirm his involvement. To this day, many believe Lorenz was guilty, but others argue he was just a convenient scapegoat. Other theories. As time passed, countless theories emerged. Some were plausible, others were pure nightmare fuel. A random drifter or soldier, post-World War I Germany was filled with displaced people, deserters, and criminals. Perhaps a wandering killer stumbled upon the isolated farm. But this theory doesn't explain why the murderer stayed, cared for the animals, and left valuables untouched. A revenge killing, the Grubers were known to be deeply unpopular in the village. Andreas Gruber, in particular, was abusive and had many enemies. Some neighbors may have wanted revenge, or even justice, for past wrongs. The incest theory, one of the darkest theories, involves Andreas and Victoria themselves. Records show Andreas had previously been charged with incest, and locals suspected their relationship had continued. Could someone have discovered this and snapped in a fit of rage? The killer living in the attic. The most terrifying theory of all is that the murderer had been living in the house for weeks, maybe months, before striking. Imagine it. The family goes about their daily lives, completely unaware. At night, as they sleep, the killer creeps down from the attic, watching, waiting, planning every detail of the attack. The missing keys, the noises Andreas heard, the strange footprints in the snow. It all fits chillingly well. Why the case was never solved. Despite a massive investigation involving over 100 detectives and more than 300 interviews, the case was never solved. Here's why. Lack of forensic technology. In 1922, there was no DNA testing, no fingerprint databases, no modern crime labs. Crucial evidence was lost or contaminated before it could be properly examined. Massive media sensation, the case became a national obsession. Reporters swarmed the farm, and crowds of curious onlookers trampled potential evidence. Poor handling of the scene, unbelievably. Investigators actually removed the victims' heads to study them in Munich, only for the skulls to be lost during World War II bombings. Without them, vital evidence was gone forever. Too many suspects, no clear proof. Everyone had theories, but no one had proof. Each new lead only deepened the mystery. The aftermath, the farm was eventually demolished, but the murders left a permanent scar on the village of Hinterkaifeck. For years, locals claimed they heard whispers and footsteps when they passed by the ruins at night. Some swore they saw a figure in the fields, watching from a distance. Even today, true crime enthusiasts and paranormal investigators visit the site, hoping to uncover answers that have eluded everyone for over a century. The legacy, the Hinterkaifeck Murders, remain one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in history. 6 innocent lives taken, a killer who vanished without a trace, and a farmhouse that seemed to breathe with secrets of its own. To this day, no one knows who committed the murders, or why they stayed behind, tending the farm as if nothing had happened. The case continues to haunt investigators, historians, and storytellers alike. Because the scariest part isn't just that the killer was never caught. It's that they might have been someone the victims knew and trusted all along. Final words. Imagine going to sleep tonight and realizing someone has been living in your attic, silently watching you for days. This wasn't just a murder. It was a nightmare that came to life, and it's one that never truly ended. The farm is gone. The suspects are long dead. But the shadows of Hinterkaifeck still linger, whispering through the fields, reminding us that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are real.